then Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich.
Well, thank you all for coming out today, and I want to thank Linda Upmeyer in particular. She has been absolutely the heart of our campaign here in Iowa, and we're very proud of her. The first woman ever to be Majority Leader of the State House. She did a great job, and if you look at the budget that they worked out without tax increases and the way they worked very hard and diligently, Washington could learn a lot of lessons from Linda Upmeyer and the Republicans in the legislature and the governor on how to get things done that would make Washington a whole lot better. So I guess part of my campaign is to try to figure out how to educate Washington and be more like Iowa rather than having Iowa become more like Washington. So. We are delighted to be here in the closing days of the campaign in Iowa. And let me just ask a question, because I'm curious. How many of you have received more than enough negative ads and mailers and what have you? I want to make two commitments to you. You're going to see ads from us for the next 6 days, and they're going to be positive. You're going to see ads from a so-called super PAC that favors me, and they're going to be positive. I think that we have enough trouble in this country that we ought to have a campaign of positive ideas and positive solutions, because the only person helped by negative ads is Barack Obama, and our business is to defeat him, not to help him, and I'm going to stay positive. I'm going to talk briefly and take questions, and if you want to ask any of the questions about the negative ads, I'll be glad to answer them, because I think you have a right to know the facts, and I'm perfectly happy to do that. We've also been doing telephone town hall meetings, and in fact, State Representative Josh Burns is here somewhere, and he actually got, he's right over here, he actually got a call the other night as part of a telephone town hall meeting, so he and his daughter Alexandra joined in and participated in the call. And we had 9,700 people the other night at one of our telephone town hall meetings, and I'm happy to answer any question about some of these totally false charges and exaggerations. But I really want to focus on jobs and the economy. And there's a very powerful practical reason. You have a relatively good economy in Iowa compared to some parts of the country. But the United States is the economic engine which pulls the world economy. And there are very grave, troubling signs out there in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East. And I think there's a very, very real danger that the world economy could take another step downward in 2012. And having a healthy, vibrant American economy is a key part of us getting ahead. Now, I'm going to talk to you about what I would do as president, but let me say in passing, I think the disaster of the president and the Congress passing a 2-month extension and going home as though they'd accomplished something is really embarrassing. I don't think I have ever seen Washington more dysfunctional on a bipartisan basis than it is right now. And I think this is very serious for the country because it's a mess. I mean, no business knows right now how to plan. No family knows how to plan. You know they're going to have another crisis in February. To kick the ball down the road 2 months to another crisis probably in May. To kick the ball down the road. And this is an absurd way to govern. Now, I say this with experience. I was a junior member when Ronald Reagan was elected. Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. We had to get 1/3 of the Democrats in order to pass anything. And we did. When I became Speaker of the House, we had a Democratic president. We had to get his signature to get things in law. And we worked and we got Bill Clinton to sign welfare reform. We got him to sign the first tax cut in 16 years, the largest capital gains tax cut in history. And in fact, when we passed welfare reform, 2 out of 3 people went to work or went to school. Child poverty in America declined to the lowest point ever because parents were working. And the result was the Democrats split. 101 voted yes, 101 voted no. When we passed the tax cuts and the largest capital gains tax cut in history, unemployment dropped to 4.2%. Can you imagine how healthy we'd be at 4.2% unemployment right now? In that process, we were able to balance the budget for 4 straight years. So I have twice participated in serious bipartisan reforms where you had to be able to reach the American people with an idea and get the American people to reach their congressmen and senators in order to get things done. And I watch what's currently going on, and I'll tell you, it's the cost of amateurism. Barack Obama does not have any idea how to be president. He has no idea how to negotiate. The leader of the Democrats in the Senate is deeply partisan. And so you have a logjam, and I have no idea what I would do if I were in John Boehner's shoes, because I was very fortunate both in the Reagan years and in the Clinton years to have somebody rational to work with, and you could actually negotiate. I mean, we fought pretty hard, as you'll remember, but we fought with an understanding that the country's bigger than our partisanship, and the country is bigger than our ideology, and we have to find a way to get the country to work in order for America to succeed. America only works when Americans are working. And that's a key principle of this campaign. We're focusing on jobs and the economy and on economic growth. And I'm delighted that Art Laffer is coming in to campaign for me tomorrow. I first worked with Laffer in the late 1970s when Laffer, Winniski, Larry Kudlow, Richard Rahn, Jack Kemp, and a group of us were working on what's called supply-side economics. It's a very simple model. If you increase the number of jobs and you increase the amount of production, you solve problems by having more things, more oil, more gas, more ethanol, more corn production, more manufacturing. And that mops up money, and it mops up unemployment. And so there was a fundamental intellectual argument with Keynesian economics, which basically focused on the demand side. Many people thought we'd won the argument between Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain and Ronald Reagan in the United States. And in fact, Daniel Yergin wrote a fascinating book called The Commanding Heights, in which he described how Hayek and the Austrian economist had won, and Keynes and the demand guys had lost. It wasn't true. The reason the establishment in both parties likes Keynesian economics is it puts control with the politicians. The reason they don't like the Ronald Reagan, Jack Kemp, Newt Gingrich supply-side approach is it puts power in the hands of the people. If you believe in markets, that means you have to make decisions. It means you have to be in charge. If you believe that entrepreneurs create jobs, it means you are in fact going to be in charge. The president doesn't create jobs. The president can create conditions that favor jobs, or they can create conditions that hurt jobs. But in the end, you have to arouse the American people, because it's the American people who create jobs. It's the hard work of Americans that creates jobs. So we're back in exactly the same competition between a populist supply-side approach that Reagan and Kemp and I popularized 30 years ago, and the much more timid, Washington-centered approach, which will not create jobs. And of course, Obama represents the extreme version, which is a Saul Alinsky radicalism, which actually kills jobs. Consider the Reagan model. Cut taxes, cut regulations, strengthen American energy production, and praise the people who create jobs. Say it's important to go out and open up a small business. It's important to show up for work on Monday. It's important to save and invest. Then look at the Obama model. Higher taxes, more regulations, anti-American energy, and class warfare to attack the people who create jobs. And I don't think the White House has a clue. I mean, I don't think that they get up in the morning and say, how many jobs can we kill today? I just think they don't realize that their ideology kills jobs. So you take the XL Keystone Pipeline. 20,000 jobs immediately, billions of dollars of oil going through Houston, which is the largest refinery complex in the world, a generation of money coming to the U.S. from Canadian oil on the way to worldwide distribution. Excuse me. The president postpones it. Doesn't want to make a decision. Why? Because his environmental extremists are against building the pipeline. For a very abstract reason. It's not because they worry about pipelines. We build pipelines all the time. They don't want Canadian oil in the world market because of the indirect byproduct that they see in terms of global warming. Therefore, they're trying to find a way to keep Canadian oil in Canada. Now, here's the problem. It's one thing if you have an administration that can't play chess. It's another thing if you have an administration that can't play checkers. But if you have an administration that can't play tic-tac-toe, you're in deep trouble. The Canadians are not trapped by Barack Obama. The Canadians can take Chinese money to build the very same pipeline straight west across the Rockies, put it in Vancouver, Not a penny will come to the United States. Not a job will be created in the United States. The environmentalists will lose because the oil is going to be used by the Chinese. And that's what the president's faced with. And I don't think he understands it. So he goes to Brazil and he says to the Brazilians, I really want to be your best customer. He praises the Brazilians for drilling offshore, which he stops us from doing. He tells them how glad he is we could guarantee $2 billion in equipment for a George Soros invested company. And then he praises them and says, I'd like to be your best customer. This is exactly backwards. And every Iowa farmer knows this. We do not want the President of the United States to be a purchasing agent for foreign countries. We want the President of the United States to be a salesman for American products. If we don't sell American agricultural products worldwide, we will have a depression in farm country. So we need a president who goes out and opens up markets for American agricultural products, because it is we produce more than we're going to absorb here at home. And I think Obama has it exactly backwards. We have an economic growth plan, which you can see at newt.org. It's very straightforward. Remember I said, cut taxes, cut regulations, strengthen American energy, favor people who actually create jobs. On taxes, we have zero capital gains so that hundreds of billions of dollars will pour into the U.S. to create factories and firms and give us an enormous economic advantage. We go to a 12.5% corporate tax rate, which is the Irish tax level. That guarantees that, first of all, $700 billion will come back home in profits that are currently locked up overseas that they won't bring back home at a 35% rate. It means, second, that our companies will compete worldwide. This will give us a lower corporate tax rate than Canada. And so we'll be very competitive worldwide. And third, it means General Electric will actually pay taxes because it'll be cheaper to pay taxes than to hire tax lawyers at 12.5%. We have 100% expensing. And what that means is if you're a farmer or a factory or a business, all new equipment gets written off in 1 year. And the purpose is very direct. If we're going to compete with China and India, we have to have the most modern equipment in the world in order for our workers to be the most productive in the world. And because we need productivity, I also favor changing unemployment compensation so that if you sign up for unemployment compensation, you have to sign up for a training program by a business. So we are investing in creating better human capital and better skills and a better workforce. We are not paying people for 99 weeks for doing nothing. New equipment combined with a better trade workforce means we'll be the most competitive manufacturing country in the world. We also permanently abolish the death tax because it is fundamentally immoral to say to people, if you work and save your entire lifetime and do the right thing your entire lifetime, some politician can take half of it away from your family when you die. You should not have to visit the IRS and the undertaker the same week, period. And so we abolish the death tax. Provide for individuals a 15% flat tax option. This is something they do in Hong Kong. You can keep the current code with all of its deductions, or you can fill out a single page, list how much you earn, how many dependents you have, pay 15%. And that way people have the option to either keep records or not keep records, but you have the choice, not the politician. Part one is taxes. Part two, regulation. I will ask the new Congress on January 3rd, before I am sworn in, to stay in office and repeal Obamacare, repeal Dodd-Frank, Obamacare, which is a job-killing anti-small business bill. They should repeal Dodd-Frank because it is killing small independent banks, crippling small business, and driving down the price of housing, which dropped again yesterday, by the way, which means the middle class investment in their homes lost value again yesterday. And so if you repeal Dodd-Frank, you help small business, you help the value of housing, and you help independent small banks who are currently being crushed by red tape. I would also ask them to repeal Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a bill which has huge red tape and has produced no information of any value during the last 3 years. Those three things will start to liberate American business. I would replace, and I'd like those three done before I am sworn in. so that the day after I'm sworn in, I could sign them, and we'd have that part of it done in January, and we could go about passing good reforms to replace the bad reforms that we've repealed. By the way, on the day of I'm inaugurated, we'll have a day one plan, which we will publish by October 1 of next year. I will sign, about 2 hours after I'm sworn in, I will sign between 1 and 200 executive orders. The very first executive order will abolish all of the White House czars as of that moment. In addition to repealing those 3 bills, I would ask the Congress to replace the Environmental Protection Agency with a brand new Environmental Solutions Agency, and I mean replace. I believe the current bureaucracy at EPA is so radical, so anti-jobs, and so anti-local community, and so lacking in common sense that you cannot reform it. Everywhere I go, whether it's in South Carolina, New Hampshire, here in Iowa, small towns tell me they are being crushed by EPA bureaucrats in Washington who have never visited their town, have no idea what they're demanding, and the economic cost of EPA to small towns in America is extraordinary. When you go out and you talk to businesses, I mean, they have a proposal on electricity which will almost certainly lead to brownouts, and at a time when we're trying to compete in the world market, will dramatically raise the cost of electricity. Many of you know Senator Grassley spent a year fighting their dust provisions. I mean, an agency which takes the general ability to look at particulate matter and clean air and turns that into a bureaucratic study of whether or not when you plow, the dirt from your field will drift into the neighboring field. And therefore, if the wind is high enough that the dust from your plowing will go into the neighboring field, you should not plow that day. I mean, this is, you know, do you know how hard you have to work to be this stupid? I mean, this is some guy in the Washington area who lives in a high-rise apartment with air conditioning, goes downstairs to get on a metro with air conditioning, to ride to his high-rise office where he has no windows, and he sits and he contemplates dust. It makes no sense at all. I was in Arizona talking about what Senator Grassley was fighting. They said, it's worse in Arizona. They said, you know, Arizona is a desert. And so we get natural dust storms. I would like to modernize the Food and Drug Administration so that its new job becomes to be in the laboratory, understanding science, and accelerating getting it to the patient so that we could be the leading developer of new medicine, new technology, because as the world market grows, health is going to be the best producer of new high-value jobs. And we want an FDA that helps us be at the top of that market, doesn't hurt us. Finally, you get to energy. Let me say unequivocally, with Ronald Reagan in 1984, some of you are old enough to remember this, I actually voted for a thing called gasohol. And he signed it because it was part of our getting away from Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Middle East. In 1986, I voted to renew what then became ethanol. In 1998, when big oil tried to kill ethanol, Senator Grassley said I was the person who saved it. And there's a practical reason. If I have to choose between $1 billion going to Iran or going to Iowa, I prefer Iowa. If I have to choose $1 billion going to Saudi Arabia or going to South Dakota, I prefer South Dakota. When you watch the Iranians, the news this morning, they are practicing how to close the Straits of Hormuz. Now, Twisted and I had lunch with Secretary of State George Shultz, who's been Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, at the Reagan Library on President Reagan's 100th birthday. And Secretary of State Shultz said to me, said to the two of us, how often do we have to get hit over the head with a 2x4 to realize we need a national energy policy that maximizes American energy production? If the Straits of Hormuz are closed, you will see a catastrophe in the world market. You will see a depression in the industrial world, and it will be a nightmare. We have had 30 years to prepare for this. We know exactly what the danger is. We know exactly what the requirement is. If you look at North Dakota, where the federal government couldn't stop it because it was on private land, the Bakken field in North Dakota has 25 times, that's 2,500% more oil and gas than the U.S. Geological Survey thought 6 years ago. And we're developing it because it's on private land. If we had a president who was pro-American energy, we would develop oil and gas, we would develop shale oil, we would develop ethanol and soy diesel and next-generation biofuels. We would develop wind, where you now rival. I think only Denmark produces more electricity from wind than Iowa. We would develop all the different aspects, including coal, nuclear power, and solar. But our goal would be to produce a surplus of American energy, so in a crisis you could wave at the Middle East. My goal is to be able, as president, to never bow to a Saudi king or walk arm in arm. I want to explain to the Saudis, we don't need your oil, and we're not going to tolerate your support of terrorism. Let me say one last thing, and then I'm going to throw it open to questions. I'm not here to ask you to be for me, because if you're for me, you're going to vote and go home and say you hope that I'll fix it. I don't think even the President of the United States can get this country back on the right track by themselves. I'm here to ask you to be with me. We need you, Calista, I need you to be with us for the next 8 years, to stand side by side. We need you to remind the Congress what we're trying to get done. We need you to remind the governor, the state legislature, the city council, the county commission, the school board. In addition, we need your help. If we do all the things we need to do to get America back on track, we're going to make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we need to have social media where you can say, that ain't working, the world has changed, here's a better idea. Because we together, I don't think 537 elected officials can fix this, but I think 305 million Americans can fix it easily. But lastly, if we apply the 10th Amendment and we shrink government in Washington, we have to grow citizenship in Mason City. It's not straightforward, and in Clear Lake, we have to be in a position where everybody understands that citizenship has to rise as bureaucracy shrinks. And so I will ask you to be with me. I'd love to have your help next week. I believe we can win the general election decisively, and I will challenge the President to 7 3-hour debates in a Lincoln-Douglas tradition with a timekeeper but no moderator. And I will concede in advance that he can use a teleprompter. I mean, after all, if you had to defend Obamacare, wouldn't you want to use a teleprompter? I think we have to be fair about this. I would love to have your help, and what I'd like to do now is just toss it open for questions, if that's all right. Yes, sir.
Given the recent instability, given the recent instability, potential for instability in the Korean Peninsula with Kim Jong-il's death, how would your position with regards to North Korea be different than Obama's?
Well, I think first of all, you need to rapidly finish developing a ballistic missile defense because you cannot afford any risk of a North Korean nuclear missile reaching the United States. And so I think we need to actively defend ourselves. We need to rebuild our intelligence capabilities. It is amazing to me. Plus that I met recently in Los Angeles with Korean Americans. There are 600,000 Korean Americans in Los Angeles alone. Yet our intelligence community's ability to understand North Korea is very limited. And I think you have to have a much better understanding of what's going on up there. You want to avoid getting into a fight with this regime is going to be very shaky for a while because the son who's taken over is very young. And it's a regime which values age. So all of the old generals are going to be very suspicious of this very young new leader. And I think we should be careful about what we do because what you don't want to do is you don't want to cause them to react out of fear. But I think that we should constantly pressure them. I think our goal is ultimately to replace the dictatorship. But even the South Koreans, frankly, they waver between whether they're more frightened of a North Korean military or they're more frightened that North Korea will collapse. I mean, the South Koreans looked at how expensive it was for Germany to absorb East Germany, and they know that North Korea would be vastly more expensive. So it's a balancing act in the region. But I think on balance, we have to have a strong national defense, and we need a ballistic missile defense that could make it impossible for the North Koreans to attack us directly. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker, what do you perceive to be the role of the national government as we seek to improve our educational system in the country?
I think it's a very good question. I think we should dramatically shrink the Department of Education, eliminate the federal effort to regulate education, eliminate the testing model, which is, I think, going to have everybody being taught to the test. I've returned power to the states, but I'm going to meddle for a second. I also think that we ought to have a lot less power in the State Department of Education. I'd like to see us get back to where parents were the primary implementers of education and where parents talked to the local school board and parents in the local school board developed education. But I'll also say one other thing, and again, as president, you're both leader of the country and manager of the federal government, so I can say things that are about America that we're not going to do out of Washington. I think every state should re-adopt the idea that you need discipline in the classroom, and that back in, when I was young, if you got in trouble with the teacher, you got in trouble at home for having gotten in trouble with the teacher. Then we went through this cycle where parents came in and said, how can you say that to Johnny or Sally? I'm going to sue you. And I think we have to say, get serious. The reason they're called the teacher is they're supposed to be in charge. And the reason you're called the student is you're supposed to learn from them. And we need to reassert discipline in the classroom if we're going to have any opportunity to have the kind of education we need in this country.
Mr. Gingrich, welcome to Iowa. Maybe you expected this question, maybe not, but I know that I represent a good amount of Americans that believe in God and country and our foundation and our principles. And as president, I just want to know what you would do to be able to support God in America and to definitely promote our heritage.
I think it's a very good question. As you may know, Clifton and I have both written a book called Rediscovering God in America and made a movie about the same topic. There's a paper, which is a little controversial, if you go to newt.org, on rebalancing the judiciary. Because the primary threat to our belief in God has come from judges who are secular and who behave as though they're dictators. And I got drawn into this in 2002 when the Ninth Circuit Court ruled that one nation under God was unconstitutional in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I thought that was such a radically anti-American position that I got intrigued with how had the courts become so radical. And so if you go to newt.org, you'll see there's a very complicated paper. We spent 9 years working on it, Vince Haley and I, and Vince is the primary author. And essentially, if you look at the Constitution, this is one of the great examples of how big the change has to be. The Constitution says that there's a balance of power between the three co-equal branches. So you have the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. Except the way they wrote it, the legislative comes first, the executive comes second, and the judicial comes third. In the Federalist Papers explaining the judicial branch, and Alexander Hamilton writes, it will always be the weakest of the three branches, and it would never pick a fight with the president and the Congress because it would inevitably lose the fight. Now, in 1958, the Earl Warren Court totally subverted the American Constitution and said the Supreme Court is the final definer of the Constitution. Well, by definition, that sets the Supreme Court above the legislative and executive branches, and politicians have tolerated it. And what that has done, Lord Acton wrote in the 19th century that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolute. He took out the word tends in the second half. You have judges today who are drunk on power. Judge Barry in San Antonio on June 1st said not only could high school students not pray at their graduation, they could not use the word invocation, they could not use the word benediction, they could not ask for silence, they could not ask the audience to stand, and they could not mention God. And he went on to say, if any of these five are violated, I will put the superintendent in jail. Now, I believe that that is a bigoted, anti-religious dictate by a speech dictator, which is not appropriate for the federal bench, and I think he should be taken off the bench. So the first step would be to ask the Congress to consider impeachment of Judge Barry, which would require him to come to the Congress and totally under the Constitution and defend his position and explain why he would issue such a radical statement. And I think that just the act of getting him to defend it would be very, very helpful in resetting it. You cannot explain America without the Declaration of Independence, which is a political document. You cannot explain the Declaration of Independence without understanding that it says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. We're the only country in history that says power comes from God to each one of you personally, and therefore I think we have to have a position that says we are going to defend in the public square and we're going to rebalance the courts so they understand that they are one of three branches. They're not the dictator to the other two branches.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Considering that we have a fairly dysfunctional Congress, what is your stand on an amendment to the Constitution to limit the congressional terms?
I am actually less favorable to term limits than I was in the 1990s, and the reason is the experience of states like California, where term-limited state legislators never quite figure out what's going on, and so the lobbyists and the bureaucrats now run the states. I am in favor of very dramatic election law reform. I would make it legal for anybody to give any amount of after-tax personal income if they reported it every night on the internet so you knew who was backing who. And overnight, you would have challengers spring up against incumbents all over the country, and you'd have a much more competitive environment. As late as 1890, half of every Congress was brand new. And it was because the elections were straightforward, and what we've now done is built these incumbency castles, where the first thing an incumbent does is raise money to try to be so invulnerable that nobody can run against them. And the corollary of that is we're now getting millionaires who buy seats. And I think that's very dangerous for the future of American democracy. My dad served in the Army for 27 years. I was a college teacher. I'm a middle-class person. Callista's middle class. We don't come out of a background where we can buy a seat or buy, you know, as Mayor Bloomberg did, buy the mayorship of New York. I mean, if you look at how much he spent, he just wrote a check and bought it. Well, I think that's wrong. I mean, it eliminates self-government and makes it money government. And so I think finding a way for middle-class candidates to raise the money to challenge incumbents, you'll beat a lot of these guys every 2 years or every 6 years in the Senate if they have to face real challenges and real organization. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I thought I saw him. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, given the reaction that you've drawn, would you revisit your comment about poor kids working in public schools? And please don't skip over child labor laws and the
Sure.
work ethic piece.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm glad to, sure. My newsletter today, you happen to touch on a good topic. My newsletter, which is at Gingrich Productions and at Human Events today, is about New York City janitors who are paid more than New York City teachers. And it's about the fact that you can make well over $100,000 a year as a janitor with a contract which doesn't require you to mop the floor more than once a week. And I suggested that, in fact, if you took about half the janitors for $100,000, you could hire 30 kids at $3,000 a year to work part-time in the school. They could do everything from working in the library to work in the cafeteria to work in the front office, and I'll be bold, they could mop the floor. Now, I've had liberals jump up in horror and suggest I'm trapping them into being janitors. My younger daughter, who has written 2 books and writes a weekly column, reminded me her first paying job was at the First Baptist Church in Carrollton, where she was, in fact, cleaning out the toilets and being a janitor. I mentioned this the other day to an editorial board who were in a state of shock. And they said, you would have children actually deal with things like that? And I said, well, I think if you talk to most Iowa farm families, they will explain to you what they have their kids do. And it turns out they encounter real work. Some of them actually get dirty. They sometimes encounter dealing with things with animals. It's amazing on farms what you encounter. And nobody seems to be horrified, except now EPA is proposing a rule that you can't allow children to work on the farm unless they're an immediate part of the family. So you can't have your cousin or your niece or your nephew come in. This is the kind of mindless left-wing thinking. Now let me tell you where it started. Liberals used to say, you don't want to get a hamburger flipping job. And I was working with the McDonald's people and studying McDonald's, which is the most successful franchise system in the world. And they have an entire training program for new entrants. They're the largest trainer of new workers in the world. And guess what the first thing they have to train people? Show up. The second thing they have to train people, you can't leave. Now, to people who grow up in middle-class families, this all makes sense. But if you grow up in a very, very poor neighborhood, 2 out of 3 children in the poorest neighborhoods have nobody in their family working. You're not acquiring the most basic habits. The goal is not to get them to be trapped at a job like that. The goal is to have them start rising by learning the habits of work. So I'm in the middle of this. I don't know if this is responsive to you or not, but I find it absolutely fascinating because the left just went crazy. So we were in New Hampshire last week, in Manchester, And a young man walks up to me, who's 16 years old, who owns his own donut company, which he started at 11. Because his father, who's an investment advisor on 401ks and things like that, was trying to get him to understand free enterprise. So his father is thrilled, by the way, because he now, for the first time, can deliver his own donuts without Dad having to drive the car. But he has 2 restaurants that serve his donuts every morning. And he's out there baking, 40 donuts at a time and packaging them. Now he's been in business for 5 years. I think this is wonderful. Gallup reports that 50% of the kids in the United States would like to own their own business. I would like to say that in the poorest neighborhoods, if we had 1 less janitor and 30 kids working, which would also lower the dropout rate because they'd have a reason to go to school, you'd have better kids with better pride, with a better work ethic, and they would rise in life from having learned at an early age that you can earn money, you can budget money, it's your money, it's not the government's money, and no politician can tell you what to do with it. So I'm going to defend my belief that if we had more work, we would actually have earned self-esteem. You can't give self-esteem, you have to earn it. And that's why the left is profoundly wrong about how America works. Too, because I'm not picking between you. I don't want to start a fight.
I have 2 issues. The light one would be that I think I would like to see a very, very classy lady be the first lady. I think she's somewhat homegrown here, and she will definitely add some flavor to Washington. My second issue is I believe it appears to me that the Arab Spring is going to turn into a Muslim Brotherhood summer. Where can the United States position itself and be led if or this does happen? It's just a fear or a concern.
Yeah, let me, on your first very nice positive comment let me just mention about being homegrown. That last night we were at Maeve's Pizza in Decorah, which some of you remember, and most of us at Luther, and it turns out the room we met in was the room she had her graduation party in. And that her senior year spent her senior year living above Maeve's Pizza, so she had pizza smell 24 hours a day. But she was really happy in terms of being homegrown. She was really happy to be back at Maeve's, and I have to confess the pizza was pretty darn good. I think there's every reason to worry. If you watch what's happening in Iraq and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Egypt and Tunisia and Libya, I'll just give you 2 quick examples. We have to liberate our intelligence community from all the restrictions Congress has put on it over the last 36 years, because we today don't know enough. We don't have real spies. We rely on local governments to tell us things. And this is enormously dangerous because we literally don't know, for example, on the Libyans from Benghazi, which was a primary supplier of anti-American fighters for Iraq. Are these anti-American Libyans who have now taken over Libya? And if so, who are they? What are their relationships? We don't really know the relationships in the Muslim Brotherhood. And by the way, you can extend this all the way down to Nigeria, where there's a war against Christians in northern Nigeria. In Iraq, there were 1,200,000 Christians when the Americans arrived. There are 500,000 today. 700,000 Christians have left Iraq because of the failure of the Americans. You just look around at the things that are going on, and I think we do not today have a strategy large enough and comprehensive enough to deal with the scale of the problem. This is not a military problem. This is a strategic thinking problem first. General Abizaid, who used to be the head of the Central Command, said to me 2 months ago, our strategic deficit is bigger than our fiscal deficit. And we start there. In 1947, we intervened covertly, and we saved France and Italy from going communist in an election by pouring money in to help the anti-communist side. We have no understanding today, no mechanisms, and no capacity to help those who would like to be moderate Muslims. And as a result, there's a grave danger they will be drowned by the forces of radicalism. And I think that's a danger in every single country where this is going on. And we are simply unprepared for it. And you get to be the last question, sir.
What is your stand on the UN stand on wanting our guns?
I believe that the Second Amendment, which is worded very carefully, the Second Amendment does not give you the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment says, the right to bear arms shall not be abridged. Very important. The Founding Fathers, remember, I'm wearing George Washington's command flag. The Founding Fathers believed that the right to bear arms was endowed by your Creator as an ability to defend your political rights. And the Founding Fathers all knew that if they had not had the right to bear arms, the British Army would have crushed them. I believe that the United States actually should go on offense worldwide. I think we should be explaining why the right to bear arms would lead to a better world. We should be actively fighting the United Nations efforts. Again, this goes back to who controls. The elites would like to take away our guns because the elites would like to control us with no recourse. Having a free America made up of free people just drives the elites crazy because we don't fit their model. They would like us to be subjects to government. We are citizens and government should be subject to us. And that is a fundamental fight with elites all around the world. And we should have the courage to go out and take the Second Amendment everywhere in the world.